Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about this little video and the subject that I found to be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video reviewed by that of Mr. AKHi TV. And you're going to notice that AKHi TV, of course, within this video, that he's a little bit more irate and agitated than usual. And the reason why that is because for those of you that did not recently hear, Mr. Terence Bud Crawford, who of course is one of the greater, if not the greatest, or the number one guy of his generation for boxing, of course meaning the greatest fighter of his generation for boxing, right there in my view, with Canelo Alvarez or Alexander Usyk. Maybe in a way, if he can also continue his stride, we'll see what ends up happening. But, Terence Bud Crawford, a guy that, of course, is one of the greater fighters, there has been certain criticisms about his resume in the past, which in my view have been somewhat relevant. Now, the thing is about AKHi TV and Dante's Boxing Nation, what they'll love to say is that, the reason why Terence Bud Crawford was not ranked as the number one pound for pound fighter for so long is because, quote unquote, old media, that they were trying to put non-black fighters as the number one pound for pound fighter, so they didn't want to see black dominance at the number one pound for pound spot. And I can understand Dante and AKHi TV's, perspective to a degree. But at the end of the day, when Lomachenko and Canelo Alvarez, when they were claimed to be number one pound for pound, they had a great argument for it. They had the results, they had a resume, they had won titles in more weight divisions at the time than what a Terence Bud Crawford had done. It just is what it is. And then on top of that, they had a better resume than what Terence Bud Crawford did at the time. People can like that, they cannot like that. But anyways, of course now, Alexander Usyk is debatably the number one pound for pound fighter. Right now, in my view, he would be the number one pound for pound fighter based off of his most recent level of dominance and level of competition, him being a decent amount smaller than the decent heavyweights that he has fought, including Tyson Fury and AJ Anthony Joshua, him being undefeated as a fighter, him being very dominant in both weight classes, and probably having the toughest run, at least in terms of level of competition, for being undisputed in two separate weight classes, which of course is a very tall task. But anyways, Terence Bud Crawford, of course, went on a podcast as of recent, I believe with Triple C or Henry Cejudo, who, of course, for those of you that don't know him, he was one of the greater, UFC fighters, I believe, at 125 or 135 for a little bit there. He was a double champion, for a short time in the UFC before he retired and then kind of came back. But Terence Bud Crawford on that podcast, when he was asked about Errol Spence Jr., who of course is hands down the biggest and the most impactful win in his career, the best opponent that he's ever fought, Terence Bud Crawford stated that he personally did not believe that Errol Spence Jr. was going to be in the Hall of Fame, which is interesting. And AKHi TV and Dante's Boxing Nation, they're very pissed off about this because the narrative that they keep trying to put out there, it basically gets refuted by a certain amount of people, even certain black fighters, or, overall at times even Terence Bud Crawford himself. Not necessarily, the fact that Crawford could be the number one pound for pound fighter, but the fact that Crawford is just so far and ahead of everybody else that they're just in two completely different galaxies or universes. All that is horseshit. When you want to talk about debatably the greatest fighter of their day or of this generation, you have Crawford, you have Usyk, and you have Canelo Alvarez. Now, in a way, could maybe fit there as well, but I think that he's going to have to do a little bit more, before he kind of gets that title. But we'll see what ends up happening there. But anyways, AKHi TV is going to talk about it. Let's tune in. Let's see what the man has to say.
So the myth, the legend, the one and only, boxing pound for pound number one, Terence Bud Crawford, came out.
AKHi TV and Dante's Boxing Nation have been stating that now for the past several years. They've been stating Terence Bud Crawford, boxing's pound for pound number one. They always have to say that within their video. And you know what that means? That means that they don't really even truly 100% believe that Crawford is as undisputed of a number one pound for pound fighter as what they're trying to allege either. Because if you truly believe that that Terence Bud Crawford is the true number one pound for pound guy, you don't have to say it in every single video. They realize that a lot of people don't actually have Terence Bud Crawford as their number one pound for pound fighter. Now, of course, what they would do to refute that is that, oh, well, people are disrespecting Terence Bud Crawford by putting Alexander Usyk above Terence Bud Crawford. Listen, at the end of the day, and there was a guy that in my latest video, he, when I talked about Crawford not being the best fighter in the world, at least as of right now, This guy sent me a video stating that, well, even Usyk had stated that Crawford is the best fighter in the world, right? And at one point in time, Crawford also stated that Usyk is also the best fighter in the world. So are we going to use that argument alone, that Terence Crawford, that he's the #1 pound-for-pound fighter? Because that doesn't make any sense. We don't make arguments off of that. But even if you wanted to make arguments off of that, Terence Crawford also said the same thing about Alexander Usyk. He said that Usyk could be the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. So keep that in mind. When you take a look at these past 2 years, Crawford, of course, has defeated Errol Spence Jr. and Israel Madrimov, two very decent fighters. But what Alexander Usyk did, in my view, it's really not even comparable. He went to a division that he was never really supposed to win a belt in the first place. He defeated Anthony Joshua dominantly twice, won the belts there. He then beat Danny Dubois, who would, of course, become a champion just a few fights later, and knocked him out. And then, of course, he beat Tyson Fury. Someone that was a decently skilled heavyweight, someone that had beaten the likes of Wilder and Klitschko and Dillian White, and Alexander Usyk was able to beat him on 2 separate occasions. So that's why I say Alexander Usyk, he's been more active. He's been more dominant, at least within his latest fights. Now, of course, Crawford was very dominant against Errol Spence Jr., but in his last fight against Israel Madrimov, he had about a 7-rounds-to-5 fight against the guy that only had 12 total fights and then won a belt because basically of a vacancy. So once again, then Virgil Ortiz gets in the ring with him, and, Virgil Ortiz, he ends up looking better against Madrimov probably than what Terence Crawford did. So right now, I'm sorry. Right now, it has to be Usyk. And I like Crawford. He's #2 or #3 for me right now. But at the end of the day, right now, Usyk, I just think, is more dominant than him. Now, of course, if Crawford was able to beat Canelo, then it would pretty much be undisputed. Then there would really be probably no debate about it whatsoever. Do I see that happening? More than likely not, but you never know. But anyways, AKHi TV and Dante, they keep trying to state this shit. Like, it's almost like a counselor, that tells someone to look themselves in the mirror every morning and tell themselves, like, out loud that I am someone, or that you can do things, and that you are important, and that you have a voice. They're trying to speak something into existence. And oftentimes when people try to speak something into existence, it's because they don't even 100% truly believe it themselves, at least as of yet.
Dissing Errol Spence once again by stating that Errol Spence is not a Hall of Famer. Here is exactly what the pound-for-pound king said and why he...
See, there he goes again. Every time he has to mention Terence Crawford, he has to put pound-for-pound king.
believes that's the case. Check it out.
I can retire right now and be in the Hall of Fame. He couldn't. Like everything that I've accomplished, he's still trying to accomplish.
Do you not think Spence will be in the Hall of Fame?
Right now? No, how?
Yeah, he's right, dude. He's right.
How?
And let me just personally tell you this, because there's so many conversations about who should make the Hall of Fame and who should not make the Hall of Fame. It depends on your standards, but I go according to the standards of what I see the Boxing Commission count, as quote-unquote Hall of Famers. At the end of the day, I would even put certain fighters like Paulie Malignaggi and Zab Judah within the Hall of Fame. So if those guys are going to be in the Hall of Fame, I would also have to put Errol Spence Jr. in the Hall of Fame. Many people always try to create these standards of why this fighter is not A grade or why this fighter is not within the Hall of Fame, and it's always usually some stupid bullshit that doesn't really make any sense whatsoever. Errol Spence Jr., in my view, is a Hall of Famer. He also was an A-grade level fighter. That being stated, can he be remembered as an all-time grade level fighter? No, probably not, because he didn't accomplish enough. He didn't win in enough divisions. He didn't have enough hardware. He's not up there with quote-unquote all-time grade level fighters. Now, that being stated, it does depend on what you count as an all-time grade level fighter. But in my view, Errol Spence Jr., is he ever going to be classified as a quote-unquote all-time grade level fighter? No, he's not. I'm not really quite sure who I would compare him to in terms of greatness, but, I cannot necessarily call him an all-time grade level fighter.
He fought in one division.
He never unified the belts.
He unified.
He did unify.
IBF. He unified.
Was it?
He had three.
Yeah,
the
but he didn't unify all four. He wasn't
IBF.
undisputed.
Huh?
He wasn't undisputed.
He wasn't. No, but what I'm saying is, they already called him a weight bully, right? He beat Kell Brook.
Well, a certain amount of people overall, and let me rewind this because Crawford's going to try to make another point with Kell Brook. But Terence Crawford is saying that a certain amount of people called him a weight bully. Well, there were some people that were saying that Spence was a bit big for the 147-pound weight class, but I wouldn't necessarily call him a quote-unquote weight bully. Who I would call a weight bully would be guys like Sebastian Fundora or David Benavidez, when they fought at 154 or 168. Those are guys that are weight bullies. Or Jarrett Hurd when he fought at 154, like when he fought against Lara, that was a dude who was a massive weight bully. Those are guys who are weight bullies. Spence was a guy that was just a little bit bigger, for the 147-pound weight class. So I mean, come on. And listen, what I'm also going to say is this. Terence Crawford acts like he was completely like a natural 135 pounder when he was down there. Like, dude, you're 5'8" with a 74-inch arm reach. You're not a natural 135 pounder. Like, Terence Crawford, when he was at 140, he was also rehydrating at 160 plus pounds. A lot of people don't remember. But when he was fighting guys like Victor Postal and Julius Ndango, he would rehydrate to 160 plus pounds, which was heavier than what Floyd Mayweather Jr. or Manny Pacquiao were, for example, at welterweight. So when Terence Crawford fanboys or Dante or AKHi TV, when they keep trying to make this case about how Terence, he's moved up 3 weight classes, they keep trying to, allege or keep trying to make this point about how Crawford, how he was at this quote unquote massive size disadvantage, at 140 and at 147, which is horseshit. He was never at a massive size disadvantage. He's really never been at a massive size disadvantage at all in his career. He's not really fought any elite level fighters that would have been taller or lengthier than him that truly know how to box to an elite level degree. I mean, Victor Postal was a bit taller and lengthier, I'll give him that. But when you talk about him versus Errol Spence, Spence may have been a little bit stockier, but Crawford, you're the guy that has a 74-inch reach, which is pretty astronomical even for that weight class. Usually when you talk about the welterweight class, it's going to be anywhere from like 68 to, probably 72 inches. A 74-inch arm reach is a reach that you should probably have at around the 154 to 160-pound weight class. And it's not like Crawford is light in the ass. A lot of people always try to act like he's light in the ass. He's a guy that rehydrates to 160 plus pounds and has a 74-inch arm reach. So when people keep talking about Crawford being this quote-unquote guy that was at such a disadvantage, all that is bullshit. And that's why I say when Canelo Alvarez, for example, when he was at 160 and 168 and at 175, he was fighting guys that are legitimately bigger than him. Like when you take a look at Canelo Alvarez versus Dimitri Bivol or Berlanga or someone like Jaime Munguia, not saying that all those fighters are A grade, but when you take a look at the size comparison, Crawford has never been in a fight like that, man. Like never. He's never been in a fight where the fighter out-heightened or outreached him by several inches, or was bigger than him. And then on top of that could weigh more than him and is adjusted to a completely new different weight class. It's never happened. Crawford can always compete in terms of the reach and in terms of the weight. Even against Israel Madrimov, where Madrimov was obviously a bit stockier, it's not like Crawford couldn't compete in terms of the weight or the size. He was even a bit heavier in that fight, and he looked like he carried the weight well. It wasn't like it was when Canelo Alvarez gained all that weight, and it clearly made him more lethargic in the Dimitri Bivol fight. So, I mean, give me a break. And there, people always try to say this shit, but there are certain fighters that when they start off in their career at a certain weight class that they don't really belong there. Like when you talk about Oscar De La Hoya at 135, there is no way that Oscar De La Hoya was a natural 135 pounder. Same with Teofimo Lopez and Devin Haney. Those guys are not natural 135 pounders. They can make it early on in their career because their body is not, as grown in yet as what it's going to be later on. But it's the same thing with Terence Crawford. Crawford was never meant to last at 135 or 140 for his whole entire career. He was at the very least going to be a natural welterweight. So this narrative of, Crawford being this guy that was massively outsized, all that is horseshit. He's never been massively outsized in any fight in his career. Never.
He wasn't undisputed.
He wasn't. No, but what I'm saying is they already called him a weight bully, right? He beat Kell Brook coming off of a loss, an eye injury.
Well, we can mention that point if you want to, Mr. Terence Crawford, but let's really not bring up the Kell Brook point. And the reason why let's not bring up the Kell Brook point is because the last time that Kell Brook even had a shred of goodness or greatness within him, or even a little bit of a spark, was against Errol Spence Jr. Now, was he maybe 100% the same fighter when he fought Errol Spence Jr.? No, probably not. But he still had a little bit of goodness within him left, a little bit of a spark, and that's why he performed very well against Errol Spence Jr. and made it a very tough and rough fight Against Terence Bud Crawford, he got knocked out in 4 rounds because he pretty much was done by that time. It was well known by almost everybody. Unless, once again, let's be real, you're one of these pro-black cult channels like AKHi TV or Dante's Boxing Nation that, wants to make it, look 10 times bigger than what it actually was. Kell Brook had not been in at the 147-pound weight class in several years, or at least a few years. He was not looking good against the C grade level fighters that he was fighting. He clearly was vulnerable. He was a guy that had nowhere near the same amount of movement nor spark within him. He was done. That's when Terence Bud Crawford had fought him. When Kell Brook had fought Errol Spence Jr., at least you could classify it as an A- level win because he was still a champion at 147 when Crawford fought Kell Brook. By the way, AKHi TV, he loves to always bring up these points about how Canelo Alvarez, he fought a guy and Danny Jacobs had already lost that wasn't in his prime. Right, but Terence Bud Crawford fought Kell Brook in his prime. Fighting at 154 there for a few years, had to go back down to 147 when he hadn't fought there in years. A guy that already had suffered 2 knockout losses and never beat anyone elite ever again. It was a guy that was noticeably different when he fought Crawford. Like, give me a fucking break. So no offense against you, Mr. Terence Bud Crawford, but it's not like you fought a good version of a good version of Kell Brook either. Errol Spence at least fought a good borderline great version of Kell Brook. You fought a complete washed up version of him. Is what it is.
He beat Sean Porter.
In all fairness, he had to go over there to get that.
Like I said, that's a good win. Like, I don't want to sound like I'm hating on him or,
I understand
things like that, but
Right.
I honestly don't know if he make it to the Hall of Fame with the accolades that he didn't got right now.
Well, basically then what you're saying, Mr. Terence Bud Crawford, is that you've never beaten a Hall of Famer. That's what you're stating. Because Errol Spence Jr. is hands down not only the best, but the most accomplished fighter that you've ever fought. Period. What other fighter is there on your resume that is more accomplished than Errol Spence Jr.? It's not Gamboa. It's not Victor Postal. It's not some of these other guys. Like, when people try to make Victor Postal, like, a lot of people don't, realize about Victor Postal. He won his belt off of Lucas Matisse. He didn't even defend it once because after that he lost to Terence Bud Crawford, I believe. And then he ended up losing every other big fight in his career. And it's not like he got stopped in brutal fashion against Crawford. He just got completely outboxed. So once again, Terence Bud Crawford, as great of a fighter as what he is, his fans majorly overrate his resume.
Now I gotta call a spade a spade. And Bud is tripping. He ain't just tripping. He's tripping, slipping, and sliding. I mean, the reasons that Crawford gave made no sense. One of them was Errol Spence is only a champion in one division. But then later on, Crawford said the one division champion Hagler is one of the top 5 greatest fighters of all time over Manny Pacquiao, who is a 6th division world champion. Old media has brainwashed the public to believing that Manny Pacquiao is an 8th division world champion, which that's not the case. That's an absolute lie.
Well, what I actually will state is this, talking about the Manny Pacquiao point really quickly, because AKHi TV, he actually doesn't bring up a bad point there. When you want to talk about official titles, meaning the WBA, WBC, WBO, and IBF titles, Manny Pacquiao is only a 6-weight division champion. That being stated, if you count all the titles like regular titles, Ring Magazine titles, or IBO titles, then yes, Manny Pacquiao would be an 8-weight division champion. Now, what I'm personally going to state is this, and certain people may not agree with me, but I'll still consider Manny Pacquiao a 7 or 8-weight division champion because at least when he won the IBO title at 140, he did end up defeating Ricky Hatton, who was undefeated at the 140-pound weight class and was clearly looked at as the best fighter there. And then on top of that, the Ring Magazine Championship, I mean, what I'll state is this. I think the Ring Magazine Championship has more value than any of the regular championships that certain guys get, like Mario Barrios. But I mean, that's up to you, because what I will state is this. I definitely did criticize, certain people calling Gervonta Tank Davis a 3-weight division champion when he was only a regular champion in 2 of those weight classes, which is not a real belt. It is what it is. That being stated, I wonder if AKHi TV has the same standards for Gervonta Tank Davis, because I believe that he was a person that used to call Gervonta Tank Davis a 3-weight division champion. But anyway. But like I said, when it comes to regular titles, I don't count that bullshit. But if it comes to Ring Magazine or IBO, I might be able to let that slide depending on which fighter that you fought.
A 6th division world champion. That's still a great accomplishment, but you can't lie about stats and statistics. That's what old media does. I already made a video on that, exposing the lies of old media for years. Lied about Manny Pacquiao being an 8th division world champion. But
well, once again, Mr. AKHi TV, I have no problem with those standards, but sir, please keep the same standards and stop calling Gervonta Tank Davis a 3-weight division champion.
The point I'm making here is Crawford believes.
Because when Paulie Malignaggi said that Gervonta Tank Davis is really only a 1-weight division champion, these guys went off on him.
Hagler, who is a 1 division champion, is an all-time great. Forget about the Hall of Fame. He believes that Hagler is top 5, one of the greatest fighters of all time, and he's only a 1 division champion. And what about the...
You know, just to rewind that real quick, to go back to the graphic of the 4 kings. If you're asking me once again who is the greatest, you know, to the least greatest, in first place I would have to have Sugar Ray Leonard, because he's the only one here that ended up defeating all 3 of them. After that, I would have to have Roberto Duran. Now, I used to think that Roberto Duran was in last place when I was younger, but as I grew up and started to figure out more about boxing, I understood why so many people had him either as the best fighter of that generation or as the number 2 fighter of that generation. And I would have him at number 2. And the reason why I would have him at number 2 is because Duran, even though he did lose some of the bigger fights in his career, he also did win against Sugar Ray Leonard, which was something that was not supposed to happen, especially with him moving up in weight 2 weight classes. He also was a guy that was exceptionally skilled and a guy that actually gave Marvin Hagler a tough fight. And people must understand, Roberto Duran was a guy that could have fought at 135 for the rest of his career. Like, he wasn't like a Terence Crawford to where he could have, you know, he was eventually going to grow out of that weight class. Roberto Duran was a guy that really didn't really have much business being any higher than probably 140 or 147. So the fact that he was a legit 5-weight division champion, I believe, that speaks volumes. Now, after that, I would have to have Marvin Hagler. He did only win in 1 weight class, but I mean, he's still an all-time grade level fighter. And then afterwards, Tommy Hearns, who I believe is a 4-weight or 5-weight division champion, depending on if you count, I believe, his IBO title at the cruiserweight division, I believe. I would have to see who he ended up beating there. But I've always stated this. Tommy Hearns, although a great fighter, massively overrated, in my personal view. And I know that a lot of people are not going to agree with that. Tommy Hearns, when you take a look at any of the fighters here, size for size, pound for pound, probably was the most physically gifted fighter out of any of them. He had the most amount of speed. He had debatably the most amount of power. He had great boxing ability, and he lost to Hagler by knockout. He lost to Sugar Ray Leonard by knockout as well. Now, in the rematch, I thought that he should have beat Ray. They gave him a draw. But the point being is that with the physical talent that he had, overall, the fact that he lost against Sugar Ray Leonard and Marvin Hagler, nah, sorry. And he also lost, I believe, to, what the hell is his name? Iran Barkley, I believe was his name, a fight that he never should have lost in the first place. Now, he did beat Roberto Duran, but to me, to be honest with you, I really don't count that win. Because it's not even like that was a Canelo Charlo or Spence versus Garcia situation. Like, Duran had fought at the welterweight division, yes. But Duran was a dude that was fought like, what, 5'7", a guy that really didn't belong there in the first place. Tommy Hearns was a guy that really was a weight bully and a guy that was a size bully at the welterweight division. Like, I'm sorry, but nah.
The Hall of Fame.
Guy was damn near the same size as Muhammad Ali in terms of height and reach. No.
He believes that Hagler is top 5, one of the greatest fighters of all time, and he's only a 1 division champion. And what about the 5 greatest of all time, pound for pound?
Ooh, you got Sugar Ray Robinson, you got Sugar Ray Leonard, you got Floyd Mayweather, you got Marvin Hagler, you got Roberto Duran. That's 5 for you right there.
Really? You put Hagler up there like that?
Yeah, that dude was great.
Hagler was an all-time great fighter. I don't think that he would be within my top 5. And Roberto Duran is also an all-time grade level fighter, but he also would not be within my top 5. Reason for that being is that even though Roberto Duran, even though he was a 5-weight division champion when he had no business being one, Roberto Duran had just lost too many big fights in his career. You could frustrate him and you could get him to lose overall in certain fights. That's why Wilfred Benitez ended up beating him. That's why he lost certain other fights as well. Roberto Duran, once he started moving up the weight classes, he did lose certain bigger fights. It just is what it is. And that's why he can't necessarily be counted on the same level as someone like a Manny Pacquiao or Floyd Mayweather Jr. People to where when they did move up the weight classes, they actually won their bigger fights.
And it's so many more. Like, you got Sweet Pea, you got so many other fighters.
But you don't put Manny up there. That's surprising to me, honestly.
It's a reason why he's not up there.
But
you should know that reason.
I want to hear from you. We talking about this.
Thank you. Come on, man.
It's your interview.
Man, Manny's a generational talented fighter. Like, he's accomplished what no other fighter is ever going to accomplish.
Yeah.
Again, but I don't feel like, he did it on his own.
And what Terence Crawford is stating there basically is that he believes that Manny Pacquiao was on steroids. And many people believe this because, of course, Manny Pacquiao would move up the weight class, kind of retain the same power and speed, blah, 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 all sort of stuff. And listen, what I'll state is this. Do I believe that it's very possible that Manny Pacquiao was on something? Yes, personally, I do. That being stated, Terence Crawford, do I also believe that he's on something? Yes, I do. You're not going to sit here and tell me that these fighters with the snack program with Victor Conti overall, that these guys are not on something. Now, what I will state is this, is that if we're going to go with these standards about Manny Pacquiao, about him looking great when he moves up a weight class and not much seems to change, what happens if Terence Crawford actually looks athletically great against Canelo Alvarez? What if he actually looks super fast and retains the same power, the same nimbleness? Would we not wonder if Crawford is going to be on steroids? Because he didn't just move up one weight class, he moved up a couple. So once again, it would be interesting.
That's me personally, because for the simple fact, when Floyd made it a point for him to do the blood test, he didn't want to do the blood test. But then when he did do the blood test, he haven't got a knockout since.
Well, I don't know if that's really what happened. I think what happened was that Manny Pacquiao, that he just started getting a little bit older, and overall, he just kind of regressed a little bit as age, kind of got to him. I wouldn't say that, he ended up losing knockout power, once, he was taking blood tests. Pacquiao, I believe, was probably on something for, almost his whole entire career. So to me, I mean, and for those of you that remember, Manny Pacquiao, against Keith Thurman, neither of them signed up for VADA testing, I believe, so they were probably both on something. And Manny Pacquiao ended up winning that fight, and he still did not get the knockout. So there were other fights to where both fighters were probably on something, but Manny Pacquiao did not end up getting the knockout. So, I mean, I'm not really going to go that far. I think that that's just more because of regressed age. But the thing that is the truth is that, Manny Pacquiao, the reason why he refused the Floyd Mayweather fight back in 2010 is because they were trying to get it signed, but Manny Pacquiao stated that he did not want to take a drug test because he was a quote-unquote afraid of needles or something like that.
Godly, man, that shit breaks my heart, dude.
But he was aging, though.
Listen, one thing for certain, two things for sure.
Fact.
What's the last thing that leave you? Is the power.
Right.
You may lose speed, you may lose athleticism, but that power gonna still be there.
Right, the power was still there, Mr. Terence Crawford, but, Manny Pacquiao overall was in a weight class by that time to where, he really did not belong in the first place anyways. I understand what you're trying to state, but at the end of the day, I don't think that that's the main reason why Pacquiao stopped getting knockouts. I just think that he stopped getting knockouts overall because he was just starting to age a little bit more. Now, do I believe that he was probably on something? Yes. But, I think that he was on something even when he allegedly was taking tests. So, I mean, is what it is.
At George Foreman.
Right. That's the last thing I'll
Look at George Foreman.
Right. That's the last thing I'll
It's very telling how Triple C had no problem with Duran being on the list and didn't question it. But he had a problem with Hagler being on the list, who beat Duran and also beat Hearn.
Right, he beat Duran and he beat Hearn, but the thing is that Marvin Hagler is only a one-weight division champion, Mr. AKHi TV. and Roberto Duran was never supposed to be up there in the first place. So Hagler was always supposed to beat Roberto Duran. The fact that it was even close in the first place shows you how great Roberto Duran actually was as a fighter. So once again, AKHi TV is going on his regular victimization bullshit. But I mean, you know, it is what it is.
But Duran, on the other hand,
and once again, keep in mind that Duran was the only one out of any of these guys that beat Sugar Ray Leonard. Keep that in mind.
Lost to all of the Fabulous Four fighters. In fact, he even lost to the Fabulous Five. Benitez.
He did definitely lose to Wilfredo Benitez, and that's why Duran, in my view, that's why he cannot be a top 5 fighter of all time. All-time grade level fighter. He is, in my view, the second greatest fighter of his day. Debatably, you could either switch him or Marvin Hagler. Tommy Hearns, in my view, though, he's last. To me, there's not much debate about that. But, you know, it is what it is. But point being is that, you know, Roberto Duran, great fighter, did lose some of the fights in his career that he probably shouldn't have, you know, or that, you know, should have maybe found a way around them. But he did defeat Sugar Ray Leonard, something that Tommy Hearns and Marvin Hagler were never supposed to do, or that they were never able to do.
So be him. But let's get back to Crawford. So how come when it comes to Errol Spence, being a one-division champion disqualifies him from being a Hall of Famer? But when it comes to Hagler, being a one-division champion doesn't disqualify him from not just being a Hall of Famer, but being an all-time great. That's a big difference between the two. A Hall of Famer at this day and age is pretty much nothing. Rocky is in the Hall of Fame. I'm not sure if Crawford is informed on the fact that there.
And let me also state this, because whenever I have a conversation about a fighter, they'll be like, oh, well, you know, you can't really state how great they are because how many Hall of Famers did they quote unquote beat? Like, this is the same stupid ass argument that many this is the same stupid ass argument that many LeBron James fans will always love to use. Like, they'll be like, well, how many super teams did Michael Jordan end up defeating? Like, dude, a team doesn't have to be looked at as a quote-unquote super team, for example, or these players don't have to be all first ballot Hall of Famers for that to be a great team of that year. Like, when you take a look overall, once again, you know, when you take a look at Jordan when he faced off against the Supersonics, a lot of people may not remember those guys now, but you're talking about that team in 1996 that had Gary Payton, Sean Kemp, Hershey Hawkins, Deadlift Shrimp. You know, also I believe that is Sam Perkins, and you know, all those guys were all-star caliber players back then. So I mean, you know, people, you know, don't understand really what the hell they're talking about. So when you talk about a fighter, for example, that at the time overall was very dangerous, like if we were to discredit David Benavidez' resume, for example, we could sit back and take a look and say, oh, well, David Morrell's not a Hall of Famer, so we can't count that as a great win. That's not how it works. You have to take a look at the impact of what it was at that time.
Are plenty of fighters in the Hall of Fame that are not just a one-division champion, but champions that didn't fight anyone, or champions that became a champion and lost the title the next day. It's not just the fact that they didn't beat anyone, it's also the fact that they lost to no one. They had a short run and lost the title the next day. Some way, somehow, plenty of fighters like that still entered the Hall of Fame. Therefore, the Hall of Fame have been watered down for a very long time. So when Crawford is speaking on Errol Spence not being a Hall of Famer, he is tripping, slipping and sliding when it comes to the Hall of Fame standards.
But Terence Crawford may not be talking about their standards. He may be talking about his standards. And AKHi TV, I've heard you in the past talk about your standards about certain fighters being quote-unquote Hall of Famers or not Hall of Famers. You know, like when it came to Usyk, Timothy Bradley stated that Usyk is not a Hall of Famer. Now, AKHi TV, I believe, disagreed with him. But he said the reason why Timothy Bradley stated that is because Usyk would get killed by any other heavyweight within history, which we all know is bullshit. But, I mean, that's what AKHi TV has to try to allege, because, once again, his narrative is that Crawford is so far ahead of everybody else, and that's not even close. That's what he has to try to make you think, you know, but anyway.
Errol Spence is one of the greatest of all time.
So it's just very interesting how with Alexander Usyk, AKHi TV was more understanding. You know, some guy that was undisputed in 2 weight classes, beat a multitude of A-grade level fighters, beat a guy in Tyson Fury, AJ Anthony Joshua, and other guys. And Usyk, it's understandable why Timothy Bradley would say what he said. But when Crawford says that about Errol Spence, because they know how bad it's going to look for their argument for Crawford being debatably the greatest of his era, and it's not even a contest, all of a sudden Crawford said something that was the stupidest thing ever. You know, isn't that interesting?
When it comes to the Hall of Fame, compared to the fighters that are in the Hall of Fame. You see, it's one thing if Crawford said, Errol Spence is not one of the greatest fighters of all time, but he's a legend and he's a Hall of Famer. Then I could dig that. But to say Errol Spence, who beat fighters that are going to be future Hall of Famers, like Mikey Garcia, Sean Porter, Danny Garcia, and who knows, Kell Brook and Ugas, who beat Manny Pacquiao, can easily be future Hall of Famers.
Isn't that interesting how Ugas and Kell Brook can be Hall of Famers? Because whenever I hear these guys from these other comment sections, whenever I talk about Canelo when he fought Saunders and Plant, guys that were champions and very decent, you know, even though they did only defend their titles a few times, you know, those guys, oh, they're not Hall of Famers, they were bums and all this other stuff, right? But Kell Brook is the future Hall of Famer for, you know, very possible. Now, Kell Brook, in my view, he's around the same level, you know, maybe slightly above someone like a Caleb Plant or Saunders, maybe, but, you know, probably around the same level in my view. Because Kell Brook, you know, he was always a very decent fighter, but he also had some flaws as well.
So to say that Errol Spence is not a Hall of Famer doesn't add up. The math is not mathing. We talking about Errol Spence fought these guys and beat these guys back to back to back on pay-per-view. That's a Hall of Fame career. What are you talking about, bud? What trips me out is that Crawford promoted the Errol Spence fight as the fight of the decade. How the hell were you in the fight of the decade if Errol Spence is not a Hall of Famer? What?
Well, what is Terence Bud Crawford maybe subconsciously saying about his resume, Mr. AKHi TV? What is he maybe saying?
The reason why the fight between Crawford...
Once again, this is why, in my view, Crawford wants the Canelo Alvarez fight. Crawford has a major inferiority complex, especially when it comes to his resume. And he realizes that a lot of people are not going to look at it as great. That's why he wants to fight Canelo. Because there's no other fighter out there that can not only, first of all, give him that amount of money, but then on top of that, give him that amount of prestige. He could fight Errol Spence 10 times and win 10 times. He's not going to get the same amount of credit as beating Canelo Alvarez.
And Errol Spence was the fight of the decade and promoted as such was because both Crawford and Errol Spence were pound-for-pound fighters, top 5 their entire career. Obviously, Crawford was and still the pound-for-pound king.
Well, to say that Spence and Crawford, that they were top 5 pound-for-pound for the whole entire career, no, that's not accurate. Crawford wasn't really top 5 pound-for-pound until he defeated Victor Postal, you know, at least more than likely. And Spence was not top 5 pound-for-pound until he got about 2 or 3 belts.
But Errol Spence was top 5, top 3.
2 belts.
Pound-for-pound his entire career from the time he beat Kell Brook and Mikey Garcia till the time he fought Crawford. And the whole time between that, where he took tough challenges one after another, no tune-up. Regardless if he was in an accident, an eye injury, so on and so forth. Man, I've never seen anyone discredit his own self the way Crawford be doing. Usually once a fighter beats someone...
And that's really what your main problem is here, AKHi TV. Let's be real, because now it's going to be much harder, you know, overall for you to debate it at least as clearly. Because even Crawford has just personally admitted that he doesn't believe that Errol Spence is a future Hall of Famer. That's why they're so pissed, because Crawford is basically refuting a lot of the sentiments that they're trying to put out there. And let me tell you this, I don't agree with Crawford with some of the stuff that he's saying. But it's just interesting, once again, how AKHi TV, how it changes tune on certain things. You know, or once again, when it came to Timothy Bradley stating that Usyk is not a Hall of Famer, he disagreed with him, but he could see where he was coming from. But then Crawford says Spence is not a Hall of Famer, you know, and it's the stupidest shit ever. You know why? Because once again, they need to make you believe that Crawford is just so far and ahead of everybody else, and that's not the case.
Actually give them their credit instead of discrediting them, because by doing so, they only going to discredit themselves since they beat them. And that's the best win on Crawford's resume. Yes, Crawford's resume is full with Sean Porter, Kell Brook, but these guys, Errol Spence beat too. Yeah, he fought Jeff Horn, Postal, and so on and so forth, from Amir Khan to Mean Machine, Gamboa, but none of these guys have a better resume.
Now, listen to the opponents that AKHi TV just tried to say that were quote-unquote elite or full on Crawford's resume. Like Aegis Kavalauskas, are you fucking serious, dude? Like, just give me a fucking break, dude. Aegis Velasquez. Ain't no one overall trying to hear that shit, dude, alright? Aegis Velasquez, like, come on. The bro was undefeated. He had a draw against a dude by the name of Steve Nelson, I believe, you know, right before then. And then on top of that, you know, he ended up losing to Virgil Ortiz in the same fashion right after that. Like, please. Aegis Velasquez was never an A grade level fighter. In fact, he was never a B grade level fighter. Is what it is, you know, or well, maybe a B grade level fighter, but if he was a very low tier B grade level fighter. And you know, when you talk about Amir Khan was done. He was done ever since he got knocked out by Canelo. But you won't hear AKHi TV mention that. You won't hear how Amir Khan after that fought a guy in Samuel Vargas, got knocked down once or twice, damn near knocked out in that fight. You won't hear that. How Kell Brook was done at that point in time in his career. Once again, Crawford has 5 A grade level wins in his career. Madrimov, debatably. Victor Postol, debatably. Yuriorkis Gamboa, Errol Spence Jr., you know, and also that of Sean Porter. That's it.
Then Errol Spence. I don't know if Crawford is doing this as a payback to Errol Spence fans since he doesn't like them, or because Errol Spence was doing the same thing to him. Leading up to his fight, but that's old news. What's even more crazy to me that Crawford was on this exact episode talking about how fighters in boxing, they can lose and all of a sudden they are a bum. But in the UFC, fighters lose all the time and they don't get viewed as bums and still get support. But that's...
Well, the UFC is just a completely different type of paradigm. It's just a completely different type of system. Because there have been times where a fighter, even in the early part of their career, they ended up losing a certain amount of the bigger fights in their career, but they ended up coming back to win. And that's also partially because they get more opportunities to fight against the best of the best, you know, to kind of prove themselves. You know, with boxing, it's a little bit different. Sometimes it's very hard to get those fights, especially with promotional issues and, you know, how many belts there are and blah, 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 and stuff like that. You know, but anyways, you know, because when you take a look at the UFC, for example, if you know anything about the UFC, there was a multitude of fighters that at one point in time were known for losing a lot of the bigger fights in their career, but then came back to become champions or somewhat of championship level caliber fighters. Guys like Dustin Poirier, or guys like Michael Bisping, guys like Charles Oliveira, certain guys like that. That doesn't happen very often in boxing.
Exactly what Crawford is doing to Errol Spence. The same thing he complains about fans do in boxing is what he's doing to Errol Spence. Basically saying that he's not a Hall of Fame fighter just because he lost to him, when he's claiming that he's one of the greatest.
Well, that's not really the only reason why he stated that. Terence Crawford stated that Spence, in his view, that he doesn't believe that he's a Hall of Famer because people claimed him to be a weight bully, that he didn't really do anything else in any other weight class, and that he was only a champion in one weight class. I understand where Crawford is coming from, but I think that those standards are a little bit too harsh. At the end of the day, he did win almost all the belts of one weight class before he fought Crawford. He did beat Porter, Mikey Garcia, Yordenis Ugas, Kell Brook, Danny Garcia, you know, and some of the other guys. Sure, not every single one of those guys maybe are confirmed Hall of Famers, but all those wins you could debate are A grade in my view. You know, just in my personal view.
Fighters of all time. That doesn't add up. It ain't like Errol Spence lost to a trash fighter. He lost to one of the greatest fighters of all time. If it wasn't for Bud, Errol Spence will still be undefeated. You see, you can't have it both ways. You can't say you the greatest or one of the greatest and then say Errol Spence is not a Hall of Famer.
Agreed. Which was once again why they're so pissed off that Terence Bud Crawford stated this. Because how can they keep stating this stuff about Terence Bud Crawford being this all-time grade level fighter, and this guy that, once again, is clearly so far and ahead of everybody else? That's really the main point that they're trying to get across. How can they state that if even Crawford has stated that he doesn't believe that the best opponent he ever fought is a Hall of Famer?
I told you guys back then, Crawford actually came out when T.O.
And once again, I don't completely agree with Crawford there. Crawford is an all-time grade level fighter. All-time grade level fighter. His resume is just massively overrated by his fan base.
Called him a monkey and said, it's crazy that it be your own people that be hating on you. And I thought that was odd because Crawford, when he was talking about Ryan beating Devin Haney, he never mentioned Ryan taking PEDs. He kept talking about Devin Haney getting dropped, how he lost, but He got up every time. He didn't quit. And he never mentioned PEDs. So it almost came off like he was shitting on him.
But yet he brought up PEDs and Manny Pacquiao. Very interesting.
And now he's doing the same thing. He was complaining.
However, maybe that was Terence Crawford's almost way of almost telling on himself a little bit with that of the snack program. Maybe he knows something that a lot of us don't know.
About to Errol Spence. It be your own people that be hating on you. Ain't that right, bud? Well, guess what? Even old media, as biased as they are toward the fighters on the coincidentalist, even they are not saying Errol Spence is not a Hall of Famer because they know that's BS.
Which is why, in my view, AKHi TV, you, including with Dante and a lot of these other LDBC and the media channels, you guys are the most biased media coverage out there for boxing. Because even old media or ESPN or certain guys like that will still call black fighters, even though at times, of course, they disrespect them. Even they will call certain black fighters the #1 pound-for-pound fighter or all-time greats like Mayweather or Roy Jones or, that of certain other fighters. But you'll never see AKHi TV or Dante ever claim, even when it's very worthy of, you'll never see them claim that, other than a black fighter, that someone's #1 pound-for-pound. You'll never see it.
Since the Hall of Fame is full of fighters, that Errol Spence compared to them is an all-time great, is the GOAT compared to them. Man, let's cut the BS. If Jake Paul retires today, he will enter the Hall of Fame.
No, he wouldn't. But I understand what AKHi TV is trying to state. Of course, that was very exaggeratory, but I understand what he's trying to state. He's basically stating at the Hall of Fame today that it's very watered down. I get it.
I could guarantee you this. Once Jake Paul retires, he will enter the Hall of Fame.
I don't think so, but we'll see.
So Jake Paul can be in the Hall of Fame, but Errol Spence can't be. Rocky can be in the Hall of Fame, but Errol Spence can't be when he's a real Rocky character in real life. Fighters who beat no one and lost to no one can be in the Hall of Fame, but Errol Spence can't be. You gotta make it make sense. It be your own people, though, that be hating on you. It's crazy, though, how you become the same thing you sworn to destroy. Crawford.
It's like that one line in The Dark Knight, the Batman movie. Either overall, God, what did that man say overall say? You either do what's right or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Something like that. So, Harvey Dent, who, of course, eventually, ironically, ended up living up to that title because, of course, he turned into Two-Face. But anyway.
Looks at anyone funny.
Oh, no, that's what he said. He said you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. That's what he stated. Classic movie, by the way. The Dark Knight, one of my all-time favorite movies. Classic movie. For those of you, of course, that know me long enough, I'm a big movie buff. That's one of my all-time favorites.
If they don't say he's the pound-for-pound king, rightfully so. But do you really expect the race fans and old media wizards who created the New Hope order of disqualifying any fighter on the coincidentalist from becoming the pound-for-pound king?
Right, but they've not really done that. That's really more what you've done. Because at least, ESPN and certain guys, they claim that Crawford was #1 pound-for-pound, at least in certain times. It's just that they also realized that Canelo Alvarez had a great case at one time, and so did Lomachenko and now Usyk. AKHi TV and Dante, they refuse, no matter what the evidence is, overall to put a guy like that, like a Usyk or Canelo, as long as there's someone around like a Crawford. They'll never do it.
I want them to say and do the right thing.
Crawford could even lose in his next fight against Canelo Alvarez, and I bet you money they're still going to claim that Crawford is still the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. Although they would not have those same standards with another fighter. But anyway.
By telling the truth on who is the best in the world. Meanwhile, it be your own people that's hating on you. You not doing what you're supposed to do when it comes to the fighters on the coincidentalist, giving the credit where credit is due. Giving the fighters their flowers like Errol Spence, claiming he not a Hall of Famer. How the hell you expect them to say that you one of the all-time greats, top 5? I don't care if you beat Canelo or not. You're going to have to beat Usyk and Tyson Fury on the same night. They still ain't.
Well, you really shouldn't be focused on the Ring Magazine or ESPN calling Terence Crawford the #1 pound-for-pound anyway. If they're allegedly so racist and so biased, and, to a degree I think they can be, but AKHi TV and Dante are 25 times worse. 25 times worse is what it is. But when you talk about them like Dante and AKHi TV, they're never going to overall change their standards. So all you have to do with these people is that you have to expose their bullshit and, kind of reorder history in the correct way, and then you keep moving forward. Because, when I take a look at AKHi TV and Dante, these idiots are never going to praise anything correctly ever. They're morons.
Gonna say you one of the goats. Why is that? If Crawford is not gonna tell the truth on the fight.
Now look at this. It says right here that for me, the pound for pound #1 is Terence Crawford. I like this man. Great fighter. Terribly tough boxer. Isn't it interesting how they also don't put the narrative in here or the text in here where Usyk states that, or excuse me, where Crawford states that Usyk can be #1 pound for pound? Notice that they'll always parade this around, but they don't ever put the very known out there that Crawford stated that Usyk could be the #1 pound for pound fighter. It shows how much bullshit these guys are up to. AKHi TV and Dante's Boxing Nation, these guys are such con artists.
Fighters on the coincidental list, his own people, by giving them their flowers like Errol Spence, claiming he's not a Hall of Famer when he's been past that. Then how you expect the race fans and old media wizards to tell the truth and give Crawford his flowers? If you can't tell the truth about your own people, how the hell the race fans gonna tell the truth about you?
Well, the quote-unquote race fans, including you, AKHi TV, they're never going to quote-unquote tell the truth or praise anything from the truth anyway. Because if someone truly is racist or if they're quote-unquote from race, they're never going to appraise things on an objective level because even if they want to, they can't. To their terms, it is objective. So once again, just like AKHi TV, you can't trust what the fuck this idiot says. Because, even though subconsciously he doesn't believe in a lot of this shit, he believes, at least on the surface, that a lot of what he says is somewhat true. Now, deep down, he knows it's not true, and you can tell by some of his energy. But, AKHi TV truly believes that he's this major truth teller. He's not.
You. Forget about that. What do you think God's gonna do? What if he gives you a taste of your own medicine? How you gonna like that? Perhaps that's what Crawford is doing, since Errol Spence was saying the same things about him leading up to their fight and before that. But again, you don't kick a man while he's down, especially after you already got the upper.
Really? Because you seem to love to kick men down when, it's other fighters that you don't give a fuck about or that you try to tear down. Like Lomachenko or Canelo Alvarez, you were surely about kicking them while they're down then.
Man, it be your own people that be hating on you, though. But said,
AKHi TV is one of the biggest snake-ass politicians that I've ever seen. Both him and Dante's Boxing Nations. Snakes as far as I can see.
With that being said, go ahead and drop your thoughts in the comments.
But that pretty much is about it for this video. I just thought that I would talk about that. Anyways, thank y'all so much for watching. We'll see where this goes. But I just thought that was very interesting. Crawford almost kind of told on himself a little bit there about his true resume. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank y'all so much for watching, and I'll talk to y'all later.